If you've ever bought vintage chips off eBay or AliExpress, you might have encountered these. They're fake chips. And that's what this video is all about. So stay tuned. What are fake chips? Well, fake chips aren't really fake. They're misrepresentations of chips. So if you're looking for example 6502 to fix your VIC-20 or your 1541, you might go looking on eBay and buy a 6502 CPU and wait a couple weeks for it to arrive, and then it arrives, you put it in a machine, it doesn't work, or worse yet, it gets really hot and starts smoking. What you've ended up buying is a fake chip, and it's a misrepresented chip in which they obscure what it originally was and rebrand it into something that they can charge more money for. So really, where do they come from and how are they made? Well, they come from unscrupulous sellers that have chips of a certain package size, meaning a 40 pin dip that's physically the same size and dimensions and legs as a CPU, but it could be anything. It could be a microcontroller, it could be a VIA, it could be from any machine. And what they do is they use typically lasers, and they run a laser across the top of the chip, and that basically incinerates the original markings, so it gives them a clean slate. And then they'll program their laser to engrave a particular chip number and date code and so forth onto that chip to make it look like a 6502 MOS chip, but it really isn't. So what they're trying to do is they're trying to sell something that is worth less or nothing because they're defective, and they make them look like brand new chips and sell them off to unsuspecting buyers. And if you're aware that this can happen, then there are ways to tell whether they're fake or not. One thing that you can look for are improper fonts. Manufacturers, they had a certain font that they would use, or a certain logo, and that would be on their chips, and it would be presented in a certain way, certain locations on the chip. They're not always 100% accurate, these fake chips, so you can look for that. You can also look for coloration differences. If there are like the laser etching activity, it leaves kind of a rough looking surface. It's not smooth. A lot of chips, when they're manufactured, they're nice and smooth and shiny. These fake chips, a lot of them have a laser etched roughness across it, and a dead giveaway is if you see lines. So if you have the chip lengthwise across here, you can see all these lines that go across, usually equally spaced, and if you look at them in the right light, you'll see these lines. That is a strong indication that the chip has been rebranded. Another indication is improper date codes. You see, for example, the chip that we're going to look at today is a Rockwell chip, and it's a 6532 that I purchased for a project. I purchased a whole bunch of them off eBay, and they all turned out to be fakes. I would plug them in, and they just got hot. So one indication at the time when I bought these, I wasn't really that familiar with fake chips. I blindly went and bought them, assuming that they were okay. But when I went back and looked at some of the date codes that were on the chip, those date codes were after 2001. And Rockwell Semiconductor Division folded in 2001. So that's also an indication, because the people that do it are smart enough to know how to rebrand a chip to make it look like it's authentic, but they're not smart enough to do a bit of research to see what a valid date code is. So sometimes their stupidity in branding them inaccurately can help you avoid buying these. So those are the some of the hints that you can take with you from this when you're looking for chips to repair your beloved retro machine. So one important thing that you should do when you have to buy these old chips to repair your machines is make sure that you have some sort of buyer protection. If you're buying from eBay, at least eBay offers protection against these thieves through their buyer protection plan. If you buy chips that aren't any good, then you can file a claim saying that they're not authentic, and you'll get your money back at least. So in that way, you are protected. If you buy from someplace like AliExpress, you should really avoid AliExpress for those kinds of purchases, because they will always side on the seller. I've bought 6502 CPUs that turned out to be, I bought a small amount. I bought 5 from one vendor, and when I got them, they were all authentic. They were just old stock pulled from machines, and I thought, hey, I found a guy that's actually going and collecting these CPUs from various locations, and they're selling those. So then I bought a larger quantity after that, and everyone after that was a fake. It was just, they were terrible. They're terrible shape, all fakes. I raised a dispute with AliExpress, and they sided with the seller, said that I had no evidence that they weren't fake. The seller said that they were authentic, and that was good enough for them. So really, AliExpress, you have no leg to stand on. So if you're looking to buy old chips for a project, or let's say you're building a 1581 and you need some authentic chips, get them off eBay if you have to. If you can't find anywhere else, get them from eBay, because at least you have some protection. Forget about AliExpress, you're just going to waste your money. So this video is about figuring out what I got. Specifically, I'm talking about the project where I bought all those 6532 Rockwell chips. And that was a couple of years ago that I bought them, and they were all bad. And like I said, I got my money back, but I saved them. And why I saved them, I don't know. I've got a bin of old chips that I save for, I don't know why, that chips that don't work. So it actually turned out pretty well, because this is a couple years later. I decided to revisit this, and I always really wanted to know what those chips were, and I didn't know how I could figure it out. I knew they weren't 6532s because they got so hot that when I touched one after it was in circuit in this board that I had being reverse engineering. The thing was so hot it burned my thumb. So recently, I've started looking into reverse engineering PLDs and the process of decapping chips. And that kind of got me thinking about these old Rockwell chips and this plague of fake chips that we have in the world right now that's costing us a lot of money. So I thought, well, maybe it's going to be a cool idea to see what those old Rockwells, those fake Rockwells, what they really were. So I I I've been researching decapping and what it is and different methods of decapping, um, and decided I was going to try one of the methods. Their decapping is actually the process of removing the dye from within the chip. So there are a couple different ways it can be done. You can use acid and dissolve the plastic, or you can use heat to fracture the chip. Acid is an effective way, but it's dangerous, and it requires that you get 68% nitric acid. Um, it's very dangerous, very corrosive, and it's hard to get your hands on. Here in Canada, where I am, the government classes that as a material that can be used to create explosives, gun, cotton, and so forth. Um, and so as a result, it's virtually impossible unless you are in an industry that needs nitric acid, and you obviously have to have a use case for it. You're not getting your hands on this stuff. So, although it is possible to get that stuff, maybe if you knew somebody perhaps in the healthcare industry where they use it, or in some sort of some industry where they do use it, you could get your hands on small quantities. It's a very dangerous undertaking. Um, so I kind of wanted to try doing that, but again, availability of nitric acid, not that easy. So I started looking for alternatives, and I found that you can do it with heat. Um, and you do that by heating up the the package, the plastic package of the dip. And with the correct technique, you can actually extract the dye out of the dip package. So I thought, well, maybe this would be a fun way to start building techniques as to how to extract these dyes successfully using heat, in my education towards reverse engineering PLDs in the future. Um, but to be effective in decapping an IC, you really have to understand how dips are constructed. The chip itself is called a package, and this package uses thermoset or thermoplastic metal, commonly known as Kovar, or ceramic. The common ones that we deal with, like the Rockwell 6532, that uses thermoplastic, which is a plastic that can withstand a lot of heat and doesn't melt. Works, obviously for commercial applications where they have to be heated for solder to melt and so forth. So those are really the packages that I'm going to be dealing with. Each different type of package would require a different approach. Why I mentioned that. Then you have to understand the internal structure of this dip package and understand how they're constructed. And if you know how it's constructed, you'll know how to deconstruct it most effectively. So the dips, when they're manufactured, they have something called a lead frame inside. And that lead frame, it's basically a metal plate that sits in roughly the center of the dip package. And it has lines that go out to all the legs that protrude out of that package. And then on top of that, that plate goes the die. And the die is, in the context of integrated circuits, is a small semiconducting block onto which the functional circuit is fabricated. It's electronics grade silicone, and when it's manufactured, the lead frame is placed down. The die is adhered to the center, and then the electrical connections are made by machine to all the points around the die, and that connects out to the legs of that lead frame. And there's also a bit of epoxy in there to make sure that the lead frame doesn't move, and the silicone die doesn't move. Every manufacturer is slightly different, so taking it apart might be a little bit different. In some packages, the die might stick more. Others, it might fall away easier. So every package that you're going to work with in decapping is going to behave a little bit differently. From a reverse engineering standpoint, exposing the die allows a person to extract specific information required to duplicate a chip's function, typically done for older programmable devices. But in this case, we want to actually see what the chip was. And revealing the die allows you to search for clues contained on that die. Dies typically identify themselves through text, manufacturing dates, lot numbers, manufacturers, etc. All of that stuff is written, if you can believe it, in that tiny little package that's like 2 millimeters square. All of that information, including all the circuitry, is all in that space, and it can all be read off of that packet or that die. But you do require a high power microscope in order to see that stuff. Okay, let's talk about the decapping process. The process that we're going to follow in the demonstration that's just about to come up here is we're going to be using heat. And the idea in using heat is that you want to break the bonds between the die and the lead frame and the thermoplastic, that whole combination. You want to loosen those bonds that are in between the various layers. And to do that, you need heat, and a lot of it. So you can use a heat gun. I use a hot air rework station cranked up to 500 degrees. And you start heating that. Now, you don't have to worry about melting anything, because these chips will not melt. That plastic is resistant to very high temperatures. But it will get soft and almost rubbery. And that's the consistency you want to get that chip. And you want that consistency not throughout the whole chip, but mostly in the middle where you're going to find the die. Because that's where you want to break those bonds. You want to get things loose and moving, but not enough to fracture the silicone. And that's a really fine balance that you need to find. So as you'll see, I'll demonstrate, and I'll talk a little bit about that in there as well. But essentially you want to get the chip hot, and like really stinking hot. And you want to start racking it and twisting it. and that's going to start loosening those bonds between the layers. And then you work it for a while. Make sure you're getting it hot on the top and the bottom, around the center of the chip. And then as you're working it, you'll feel it getting softer and a little bit more rubbery. And then after a little while, maybe, I don't know, it's really a lot about the feel. Maybe 30 seconds, maybe a minute of working this. Then you start going a little bit further, and what you're looking for is a crack kind of down like across the narrow part of the chip, through the middle, perhaps at an angle. If you can, it's really a crapshoot. You're going to get what you get. But that's what you're shooting for. You're shooting for a crack there. And then instead of breaking it, like snapping it like a twig, you want to kind of work it apart and pull it apart. So you don't want to stress that silicone. And so you don't want to bend that, because you're going to snap it if you do try to bend it like a twig. So you crack it and you kind of work it and pull it apart. So then you've got two pieces in a perfect world. And with any luck, you're going to see part of the die sticking out, and you're going to see the lead frame that tore off the rest of the wired connections on the part. Presumably the die is on your left hand and the rest of it's on your right. So you pull that off, and then you discard that, and then you start heating that up some more, and you try to break away from the sides next, because you don't want to work on the center, because you're going to break the die, and you don't want to do that. The goal is to get that die off in one piece with no damage, no cracks, no nothing. So you use pliers and you get that hot, real hot, both sides, and work on the sides on either side of the die and the lead frame, that plate that's underneath it. Try to break away the plastic on the sides to try to get more of it gone from underneath. Because what we want to do at that point is you want to be able to grab that lead frame and push it down a bit. And that will pull away from the die, or the die will come with the lead frame plate. That would be the perfect situation, because then all you have to do is deal with a little bit of epoxy, and you hit that with some heat, and that's just going to drop off. But hopefully you've worked that chip enough at the initial part before you broke the chip in half, that you broke those bonds somewhat in between the die and the plastic on the top. And if you did that right, you should just be able to take a pair of tweezers and just push that die off the top of the plastic if the lead frame plate has dropped and not taken the die with it. So that's kind of the synopsis, the text description of how to do it. The next part of the video I'll be demonstrating how to actually do it, and you'll see that in action. So I hope you do enjoy that part. All right, so we have fake 6532 that we're going to attempt to decap. This one has the laser etch marks on the top, lines that go this way all along the chip, that they used to burn off the original laser etching on the chip. They only did it on the top. They left the markings on the bottom. The bottom says 37A02M. That might be the die number, but otherwise we don't know what kind of chip this is. So I have decapped a few other ones in this lot of 6532s that I've gotten, and each one so far has been an Atmel chip, so I'm suspecting that this is probably an Atmel chip too. So let's heat this thing up. We'll get it up to around 500 degrees, which is the temperature that I have my hot air rework station running at right now. And what we want to do is we want to get this chip pliable. We want it to start being able to flex, as we want to break it close to, or would be ideally to break this chip right in the middle of the die, because then the die is supported by the lead frame, and then we'll have access to that and hopefully be able to break out the bottom and then just lift the die out of this package. That's ideal. Doesn't always happen like that. You don't always successfully extract the die. Sometimes it shatters. Sometimes it's bonded so hard to the thermoplastic that you simply can't release it. So it's not a foolproof way of removing the die or extracting the die from the package, but it does work, and it just takes a whole lot of practice. So you just have to have a lot of dead chips on hand and to work with. So you grab both sides and you'll know it's soft enough, nice and hot, when you can flex the chip, where when you're twisting it, it actually warps. And then you know you've got it nice and hot and at a suitable temperature to break. So this is flexing really nicely. So we'll Alright, so that broke really nicely. We can see part of about a third of the die, which was really nice. You have to make sure that you heat this really well and you work it a bit. By working it, I find, by working and twisting the chip before you break it, that seems to break the die free from the thermoplastic. That may only be my supposition, but when I don't work it enough, I seem to have problems getting the die out of the package. But if it's really hot and I've worked it and twisted it enough to just twist it, but not enough to break it, it seems to release better. So the die is still sitting against the lead frame, which is giving it some support. So now we want to bend it down. We'd like to get the back off so that we can push the lead frame down and pull the die away from the thermoplastic on top. That's the ideal situation. But we're still not home free yet. Still have a little bit more to do, so I'm going to try not to stress. Work this a bit. Let's work this plastic a bit. Get the back good and hot. That's a nice break there. Keep this thing good and hot. The die isn't going to melt. Nothing's going to melt, so you don't have to worry about anything burning away. 500 degrees is hot, but it's not enough to damage anything. Alright, so we have
We have the die free from the chip, but it's stuck on the thermoplastic from the top. So we're going to try. Oh, there we go. We got it off. A nice clean removal. So there it is. I don't know if we're going to get it under the microscope, but here you can see that's the silicon die that we removed from the chip. So we successfully broke that one open. Now we're going to be able to see what this chip really was. And we actually didn't cause too much damage to this chip. I mean, we broke it into 3 pieces, which isn't really all that bad. We can still identify what this chip was, and now we have the silicone die to put under the microscope and have a look what it is. So let's do that. The camera's not that terrific. I can take some decent pictures, so I will put them up on the screen and you can see, and then we'll discuss what we find. Alright, so here I have the lab jack set up underneath the microscope, and I'm able to see some pictures. Now, unfortunately, like I said, the pictures aren't the greatest quality in the world because it's not the greatest camera in the world. So far it looks good. The die is in perfect condition. We pulled it off without any damage, so it was a success. It was a successful decap. Now, going to try to zoom in a little bit closer and try to make it out, but what I can see already is it looks like this was an Atmel chip, which is not a 6532, that's for sure. So let's see what I can do about zooming in. Alright, I am zoomed in a little further, and I can read in the corner, it says Atmel, and then there's a little M logo with a circle beneath it, and then to the right of it, it says Intel M copyright 1980. So this was definitely an Atmel chip, but I don't see any designation as to what type of Atmel it was. So I'm going to just zoom around the die here. Okay, there is a die number. It's AT37A01. Alright, so that's a good picture that we got there of the die number. That's as good as I can get with this camera. Alright, so I think I've captured a few nice pictures of the die as we pulled it out of that chip, and you can see that decapping is actually possible with heat. Like I said, not always successful, but in this case, for this test, we were. So you got to see the demonstration of decapping, and that did work. The die itself did reveal that it was not a Rockwell 6532 chip. It was in fact an Atmel chip, likely microcontroller, but I wasn't able to definitively ID what that chip was. But it definitely was not a Rockwell 6532. I previously decapped one of these Rockwell chips that I had 5 of that looked physically similar. They had
similar characteristics on the bottom. They had the same pin 1 marker on the top, but they were all obviously disguised to be Rockwell chips. So that was the first one that I did. I didn't record it, but that one ended up, I was able to identify which chip it was, and it was an Atmel microcontroller with 8K of flash RAM, and that particular chip I was able to look it up because the die number was on the die, and I happened to come across a document, an Atmel document, that pointed me to the particular chip that was associated to, and I found the data sheet for it. That particular chip was listed in my modern EEPROM burner as a chip that I could program. So I took them, and the ones that I thought were the same, I put them in my EEPROM burner, and I was able to read them and erase them, and they were perfectly functional Atmel chips. And whoever tried to dupe me decided those ones were going to become Rockwell chips, even though they didn't even have a similar pinout. They would just get hot and start smoking. It was just terrible. But that was that didn't happen in this particular decap. Was able to see it was an Atmel chip, some sort of microcontroller. However, I wasn't able to identify which microcontroller that was. But at least we figured it out that it wasn't a Rockwell chip, and more than likely all of them, I think I bought 25 or 30 of these Rockwell chips. They probably were all Atmel microcontrollers. They probably had a whole lot of them, and then they decided, oh, let's turn them all into Rockwell 6532s. So anyway, I've managed to save 5 of those chips. I don't know if I'll ever use that particular Atmel microcontroller, but I don't know. I'm inspired to maybe find a circuit for it and try them out. Maybe that could become a follow-up video to this to see if I can actually do something productive with these fake chips after having figured out what they were. So that was kind of a neat thing that I discovered. I never expected to be able to actually figure out what some of them were without destroying them and be able to potentially use them for something else. So that was kind of a really neat realization that came out of this whole process. So really, in summary, what I'd say is be careful where you shop for your old chips. eBay is rife with fakes, but they do have buyer protection. I'm not the biggest fan of eBay with regards to old parts, but at least you have some protection. And since that Rockwell chip fiasco that I went through a couple of years ago, I have been duped a few more times on bad chips, memory chips, and CPUs. I don't remember what other ones. Anyway, I did get my money back on all those, and so that kind of proves to me that eBay will at least look after you potentially. They looked after me. There's no reason why they wouldn't look after you, and at least you have some protection. But AliExpress, predominantly, my experience is that old chips are fakes there, and also my experience, they offer absolutely no buyer protection. There's some other places, Jamico, for example, does carry some old chips, not all of them, but it is kind of hard these days to find legitimate chip vendors these days. So, use some of the hints that I suggested. Get actual pictures of chips that you want to buy, and get high-res pictures and look at them very critically. Look at date codes, verify that production of those actually existed when that date code indicated. Look at the text that's printed on, that's engraved on the chip, and then if you have some old equipment, look at the chips in there and compare it. Make sure that they look authentic, that they maybe have a shiny finish on it like they should, that they're not rough and abrasive looking. There are plenty of cues that that you can take from photographs to help you in that decision making process. By no means is that any kind of guarantee that you won't end up getting fakes in the future. You could ask for pictures and they substitute it anyway, but you do your best, right? So just be careful when you buy, and for the most important thing is ensure that you have some buyer protection. So that's about all I wanted to say. I hope you enjoyed this decapping adventure I went on. I found it was real exciting. Prior to a few weeks back, I hadn't really even thought about decapping, and it's really not that difficult to do. There is a lot of risk, especially if you're trying to decap an expensive or priceless chip out of a device that they're irreplaceable. So be very careful about doing something like that. But certainly, if you've got a dead SID chip, or you've got a dead CPU, and you've got a hot air rework station, or a paint stripper gun, and you want to see what's inside, use some of the tips that I have in here, and try popping one open and see what you get. Again, you need a pretty high power microscope in order to actually resolve anything on it, but make do, have some fun with this stuff. Otherwise you're just gonna throw it in the garbage, or take it to an echo station or something, or crack open. You got an old PlayStation that's gonna go to the echo station. I'll open it up and use that hot air gun and remove some chips and pop some open and take a look at, see what these dies look like. Before I did this, I never really thought about what's inside it and what makes the chip tick. And seeing these cool dies inside really gives you a different perspective. So overall, it was a great thing, a lot of fun that I had with this, and I hope you've enjoyed it too. So I hope you like the things that I've been doing on this channel. I'm gonna keep dreaming up other stuff that's interesting, and record stuff that I think you guys might like. If you do like the things I'm doing on the channel, please do subscribe, and if you like this, thumbs up would be nice. Well, hope to see you next time on 8-Bit Resurgence. Bye for now.